Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was directed by Steven Spielberg and was written by Willard Huck and Gloria Katz. The film features Harrison Ford as he returns in the role of Indiana Jones, and the supporting cast includes Kate Capshaw, Amrish Puri, and Jonathan Ke Quan, who would later go on to star in The Goonies. An interesting decision was made by George Lucas regarding the time and setting of the film. Temple of Doom is set a year before Raiders of the Lost Ark. It takes place mostly in India in 1935, while its predecessor was in 1936. This was partly done to avoid any possible similarities in terms of story between the two films. Lucas wanted to avoid using the Nazis as the antagonists again, and instead came up with the idea to introduce a thuggy cult in their place. The crew was actually denied permission to shoot in India because the government found the script to be too offensive. So the film was instead shot in Sri Lanka and in England. The story itself takes a dark turn as the film deals with the concept of Kali, child slavery, and the use of black magic. The darker edge to this film also encouraged the introduction of the PG-13 rating, since Spielberg thought the content of the film didn't fit the PG or R rating. A lot of fans nowadays regard Temple of Doom in a more positive light compared to when it first came out. Although I do have to agree that the film is the weakest out of the original trilogy, but is a hell of a lot better than the unofficial fan-filled. You probably have heard of this. It's called Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. The less said about that disaster, the better. With that said, Temple of Doom is still a pretty damn good Indiana Jones film that delivers on the action, adventure, and the cool artifacts. Let's start with the story. I really like how the first act of the film unfolds. The musical number Anything Goes is a fun way to open the film, and it also feels like an old-fashioned James Bond title sequence. After Anything Goes, Indy confronts Lao She, and this escalates into an opening fight at a nightclub. It's an awesome way to start the film, and when Indy gets poisoned, it adds a cool element to the mix. Spielberg has said the opening of this film is like getting dessert before starting with the main course. The action in this scene has always been fun to watch. There's also a fun exchange between Indy and Lao She's children. The film transitions from Club Obi-Wan to the plane crash at the Himalayas to an encounter with a local village that has been plagued because of their theft of a Shankara stone. A lot of fans don't like the idea that Indy stumbles into his situation by pure luck, but that's never really bothered me, and I do think that it adds to the overall vibe of the movie. But seriously, you can't nitpick a film that includes scenes where a guy's heart is being pulled out of his chest and how stones have magical powers. The explanation that the film gives is that Indy was sent by Shiva, the Hindu god. The film deals with magic and religion, which drives the story forward. The second act is mostly concentrated on Pankot Palace and the discovery of the Thuggy cult. Short round, Willie and Indy are greeted warmly by the staff of the palace. We later find out that Indy does have a bit of a reputation as a reckless archaeologist, as the Prime Minister, Cheddar Lau, does embarrass Indy a little bit, which is actually pretty hilarious.
The Villagers Rock and the old legend of the Shankara stones.
Dr. Jones, you're all vulnerable to vicious rumors. I seem to remember that in Honduras you were accused of being a grave robber rather than an archaeologist.
Well, the newspapers greatly exaggerated the incident.
And wasn't it the Sultan of Madagascar who threatened to cut your head off if you ever returned to his country?
No, it wasn't my head.
Then your hands, perhaps?
It wasn't my hands. It was my misunderstanding.
Exactly what we have here, Dr. Jones.
To be fair though, Indy does press Lau about the possibility of the resurgence of a thuggy cult, as the Prime Minister is sensitive to Indy's questions. During the scene where one of the cult members tries to kill Indy, Harrison Ford actually injured his back while trying to do a somersault. He was out for a number of weeks while a stunt double, Vic Armstrong, filled in for Ford for various shots as a stand-in. This is most evident during the climax in the mine, where Armstrong acted in the majority of the scene. Spielberg was able to hide this by shooting a number of long shots and by shooting behind Armstrong for his Anyways, Indy, Willie, and Short Round go through a series of tunnels and a booby trap, which includes probably the grossest scene in the whole Indiana Jones trilogy. It's hilarious to watch when Indy and Short Round are about to die, and Willie is taking her time and saving the two.
I can't do it.
You can do it. Feel inside.
You feel inside!
Do it now!
Okay!
We are going to die!
Soft.
It just goes to show that this film does have a good sense of humor. The trio end up discovering a Thuggee cult in the middle of one of their worship sessions. They end up getting caught, and the second act ends when Indy is brainwashed by Mola Ram, the head priest of the cult. This is where the film is at its darkest, with several scenes that shows the kids working in the mines, looking for the stones. The Thuggee cult is planning to combine all 5 stones to rule the world. Indy is able to escape with the help of Willie and Short Round, and he is able to free all the slaves. It's a heartwarming sequence when Indy, Willie, and Short Round are all unlocking the kids' shackles. What follows is a pretty awesome fight scene with the main Thuggee henchman. What makes this interesting is that Indy is still under the control of a voodoo doll that was introduced earlier in the film. This makes the character more vulnerable than usual, and we see him struggle in the fight as the doll is constantly being poked at. It makes it even more compelling when Indy comes back and kicks the guy's ass when Short Round is able to get the doll away from the kid who's controlling it. What makes these Indiana Jones movies so compelling is that he's an everyman, and he's always vulnerable to every threat. The best action movies always have that aspect. I do think that today's action films lack it. He isn't a superhero who, will be on top of everything. Indy has to pull himself up from rock bottom to be able to save the day. Indy manages to defeat the henchman by way of a machine that rolls the guy to death. A minecart chase follows, and it's a highlight of the film. Well, there's a number of highlights, but it's one of them, as it's a great action scene. This scene was actually a deleted sequence that was originally thought of for Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's probably why one of the reasons Temple of Doom took home the Oscar in visual effects. I mean, a number of shots look dated, but still a good action sequence. One part of the sequence that I've always liked is when Indy hits a shovel against some tank which bursts open on a couple of henchmen. This leads to an awesome climax and involves this old bridge that's going to fall apart any second. Indy cuts the bridge in half after a brief confrontation between him and Mola Ram.
Let her go, Mola Ram! You are in a position unsuitable to give orders.
Watch your back!
You want the stones? Let him go! Let her go! Drop them, Dr. Jones! They will be found! You won't! Yanna!
Behind you!
The scene has a lot of tension. You're not sure how Indy's going to get out of the pickle that he's in. Mola Ram would rather see Indy die than to bargain for the Shankara stones. The action set pieces are iconic and exciting. You can also see how evil Mola Ram is because when he is hanging on what's left of the bridge, he starts throwing his own henchmen at Indy. He's probably the most evil and psychopathic villain of the Indiana Jones franchise. I've always thought that this was a great moment and shows that Indy finally believes that the old myth has some truth to it.
The stones are mine!
You betrayed Shiva.
You betrayed Shiva! तुम शिव के विश्वास करते हो विश्वास करते you betray Shiva विश्वास करते विश्वास करते विश्वास करते विश्वास करते विश्वास करते
He returns to the village to find that it is recovering from its former state, and the ending is a nice book ending to an awesome Indiana Jones adventure. The character of Indiana Jones always learns some lessons at the end of each film. In this one, he learns that old myths of the past aren't fairy tales, and that there is some truth in legend. In the beginning of the film, Indy almost scoffs at those who mention how much power the Shankara stones have, but at the end of the film, he admits his understanding. It's a subtle character development, but it's important for an archaeologist who would later go after the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy Grail. Also, I want to point out how badass Indy is in this film. There's just this one scene that explains it all. We also learn how compassionate Indy can be, and this adds to his character because when we hear the tragic story of Short Round and how he almost stole from Indy, Indy took him in and started to take care of him. Harrison Ford did a great job in the role, and it's clear that he always has fun doing these films. Kate Capshaw plays Willie Scott, and a lot of people find her character to be really annoying. To be honest, I've never really minded her, and just went along with how goofy it was. I mean, in one scene, people are eating snakes and chilled monkey brains. I do actually want to try a chilled monkey brain. Oh, never mind. With these films, you just have to go with it.
Dessert.
She goes from being pampered almost every second to being out in another country dealing with a dark cult. It would be an emotional experience for a lot of people. Also, a fun fact, Kate Capshaw married Steven Spielberg several years after Temple of Doom came out. Jonathan K. Kwan played Short Round, who I've always thought to be an underrated sidekick. People have always thought he's as annoying as Willie, but I've always thought him to be a good comic relief to the film. There are a number of scenes that shows how funny the character can be. I always crack up when Indy says that he's going to go check on Willie, and Short Round says, "That's all you better do." The actor just makes the character pretty likable, and he's a good sidekick. Finally, Amrish Puri gives a great performance as the head priest Mola Ram. I mean, this guy just delivers. The character is pure evil, but has this twisted sense of humor. The actor is able to do this perfectly, and I'm surprised that no one talks about his performance when discussing the film. The character is over the top and cheesy, but I still enjoy it. The production qualities are high in this film, and that's true for any film that has a budget of $28 million, which is a modestly big budget in 1984. The locations are shot very well, especially the jungles in Sri Lanka, and the village scene is of great quality. The interior scenes were shot in Elstree Studios, and I've always liked the look of Pankot Palace, the interiors. It's high class and luxurious, and I really have to compliment the production designer for how everything looks. The way that Indy enters the Temple of Doom is also done in a really smart way. The cinematography by Douglas Solicombe was epic in some instances, and I've always liked how the movies were shot and lit. One of my favorite scenes of this film is when we see an extreme long shot of Indy, Willie, and Short Round riding their elephants across a lake. It kind of reminds me of Lawrence of Arabia in a way. That film has shots similar to that of T.E. Lawrence, where he was riding camel in the desert. Solicombe always shot these films with this warm tint to them. I've always liked that specific style, and that's how I want my film shot one day. I especially like the contrast between the jungle and the palace, between the scenes of the temple. The temple is seen with a lot of red, black, and gray, and a lot of smoke, which adds to the atmosphere of it. The use of colors in the traditional manner of having our heroes dressed in lighter colors while the villains wear darker clothes of red. The music by John Williams is great once again, and Temple of Doom is actually my favorite Indiana Jones score to come out of the bunch. It has that Indiana Jones vibe, but it's a new flavor which is different, but still pretty damn awesome. Overall, Temple of Doom is a really good Indiana Jones movie that has a great sense of humor, dark twists and turns, and a sense of adventure that's different to Raiders of the Lost Ark or The Last Crusade.